Daniel, I will wait on your go ahead.
Thank you. Almost ready.
Brian Kimball, can you hear me?
I can, Daniel.
Okay. Ryan, Harry, can you just check in, make sure we can hear you, please, before we get started?
I'm here.
I see that you're unmuted, but we didn't hear anything, so could you try again, please?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Thank you. We're getting ready to get started.
All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the Town of Mills River Planning Board to order. If you all join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you much. Well, happy 2021 to everyone. We are now in a new year. I hope, obviously, you're here, so you have made it to the new year. Cheryl, first of all, thank you for joining us. If you didn't know, Cheryl lost her father this past week, so we're grateful that you are here, and we are very sorry for your loss. So we are going to add something here real quickly. Per some of our new 160D requirements, we are now required to do an oath of office. So you'll see a sheet that is there on the table in front of you. We are going to do this as a group tonight, and we'll just take a moment. So whichever you folks back there is going to be in charge of this, tell me how we do it.
Patty and Orly will take care of this.
So what I'm going to do is we're going to do it in mass. And after I say I, y'all say your names, and then I'll read the whole rest of it, and then we'll just do it all as one. And Ryan, at some point when you're out of quarantine, you'll have to come in the office and we'll do it. It has to be in person. So we'll just arrange for that at some future date. Okay? All right. Everybody ready? I do solemnly and sincerely swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States, that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the state of North Carolina and to the constitutional powers and authorities which are or may be established for the government thereof, and that I will endeavor to support, maintain, and defend the Constitution of said state, not inconsistent with the Constitution of the United States, to the best of my knowledge and ability, so help me God. I further solemnly swear that I will execute the office of Planning Board Member for the town of Mills River, North Carolina, without prejudice, favor, affection, or partiality, to the best of my skill and ability, so help me God. We're done. If you'll just sign your papers, I'll fill out everything else.
Okay, simple and painless. So now we'll move on to the adjustments or additions to the agenda. Do we have any adjustments that anyone would like to suggest or additions to that? Anything? Nope. Okay, we will let it stand. You should have received via electronic copy the minutes from our previous meeting and had a chance to read over those. Are there any changes that anyone noted that needs to be made? Okay, if no changes, then we would take a motion to approve. Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Carlin, a second. Second from Mr. Foster. All those approving, say aye. Aye. All right, so we'll move on to public comment, and I don't know if we have anyone. There's no one signed up, but I don't know about.
Yes, I believe we do have one who would like to speak, but Orly, would you mind reading what you have while I'll communicate with Melissa and see if she wants to speak, please? We received one electronically, and I think we have one person on the call, so I'll talk to her real quickly.
Okay. This is an email from Betty Dorn. She addresses the planning board. Dear Planning Board, as you make your decisions regarding the noise ordinance, I would like to offer this information about a situation which is unique to a rural community like Mills River. When I contacted the Sheriff's Department about a noise disturbance on the property behind my house, this is what I was told by the deputy who came to my home in Wedgewood subdivision. When a sheriff's deputy comes to the entrance of a property, they first listen for any noise disturbance. If they do not hear anything, they are not allowed to go onto the property. So, depending on how large the property is, the source of the noise could be acres away, and depending on how sound travels and the orientation of the surrounding properties, they could possibly never hear what the complainant hears. So, my solution moving forward is to have them come to my home first and then go to the offending property. I trust this is helpful for you and other residents of Mills River. Kind regards, Betty Dorn.
And Madam Chair, we have Melissa Rayfield on the Zoom call who'd like to speak when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Dorn, and we'll now take Ms. Rayfield.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. I am devastated that the home that I've always felt safest in now feels foreign. The mountains we have seen from my porch for a lifetime are now obscured by homes that portray a false sense of opulence, which can only be viewed as egregious to anyone who has grown up here. It is not that there are new neighbors, but they are disrespectful to a fault. Big Hills Construction and Mills River Crossing cannot be trusted to do what they say they will do or do what is asked of them. This began when Town Council approved this project proceed. They hired a local man, Jeff Tacey, who owns Franny's Pharmacy in Leicester, who claimed that they would build homes that cost $300,000 to accommodate the local need for homes, employ local workforce, be respectful with noise, lights, and plantings. Mr. Tacey laughed walking out of that meeting, saying how easy it was to get it passed. He no longer worked for Big Hills Construction directly following that meeting. They began this relationship with the town based on a lie. They have not kept any of the above mentioned line items. They are selling the homes for up to $900,000, which excludes our local workforce. No one on the job site speaks English. The construction is daily, including holidays. The lights are so bright that the typical curtain cannot deflect them. And they have planted trees that at maturity will remove all sun from any adjacent property. They have built these homes twice the size to which they were permitted. We have asked the town for 3 months to help us get them to clean up the trash that has been sitting in this phase 2 area behind us. Daniel Cobb asked them to clean the area multiple times, and it has only gotten worse. How do we hold people accountable that simply do not care about repercussions? I tell you these things because it was only brought to my attention in December of 2020 that I should have been speaking to the planning board about these issues, and we were uncertain if this board was aware of the above mentioned grievances. We have reached out to 3 town managers, 2 town planners, and numerous times to town council over the years, and was unaware that this was the appropriate board to speak to about changes in our community. We were not informed that Big Hills Construction and Mills River Crossing had submitted a plan to amend the adjacent property in June of 2020. We were informed 1 week ago that the availability to appeal this ended 30 days from that approval. Big Hills Construction and Mills River Crossing has been told by Daniel Cobb that they are not allowed to proceed with the advertised basketball courts and tennis courts that is in the proposed sports fields that were approved by your board. They are to be left green and natural. As you can see, they have been less than compliant in the past, and we feel that they might proceed with the advertised amenities in this area without taking appropriate measures. That was approved. What was approved already is a walking path that will accommodate 52 homes and north of 100 people. This path is 71 feet from my back door and 20 feet from my garden. If they were to install a tennis court or a basketball court, it would be within feet of those numbers. The noise from this usage of amenity and potential light pollution would make us feel unwelcome in our community. We beg you to all ensure that my family home is protected from this in the future, and we are able to salvage some semblance of what life used to be like here in Mills River. I thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Rayfield. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving forward into our agenda for tonight, we're first going to be addressing old business. And hopefully some of the things that we've heard in the comments from our citizens tonight will be addressed in some of the things that we're going to be discussing moving forward. So I appreciate everyone in our community who is online and participating with us. That's very important. So the first thing that we need to do is review the comprehensive plan. I'm not sure that we have any action that we have to take tonight. I hope all of you had a chance to at least provide some feedback. That was your homework, I told you after the last meeting. And I know some of you had other things going on and perhaps didn't have a chance, but I'll turn that over to Daniel and just let him give us an update on that.
That pretty well sums it up. Yes, we provided you the plan a couple weeks ago, understanding that the holidays were coming. Probably not convenient for everyone to read through it. So we wanted to take this opportunity tonight to give you time to ask any questions you might have, or if there are things that you would like to discuss. There is no action required this evening. This is part of the review of the plan. After tonight, we're meeting with the steering committee next Wednesday to review the future land use vision map that is referenced in the plan, to fine tune that a little bit based on feedback we've received from other boards and committees. And then next Thursday at the council meeting, we're going to give the full council a copy of the plan, hopefully incorporating whatever comments we have from this board. We did receive feedback from a few folks. I don't know if you all noticed on the very first page a huge spelling error. It was caught by at least one person, so that's what we need. So with that, I'm going to open it up to the group. If there's any questions, anyone has any feedback they'd like to offer, we'll take whatever we can gather.
So I will assume, because I'm hearing crickets, that any feedback that you had, you've either submitted or you liked what you saw as it was written. Would that be correct? Y'all can kind of nod your heads, that would work for me.
And as I mentioned, this is not your last opportunity. There are several more opportunities for you to provide feedback. So if you haven't had a chance to go through it, don't panic. It's still very much in the draft phase. We're going to be discussing it again next week at the council meeting, And then at the end of the month during the visioning session, we're going to have a few hours dedicated to it. And then the whole month of February is basically going to be open for public comment from any board, any committee, general public, anyone who wants to be involved. So there's ample more opportunity. And then, of course, once we have a finalized draft of the document, it'll come back to the planning board. Currently, the schedule for that is your first meeting in April. So you'll, again, get another formal chance at review at that point as well. So there'll be other opportunities.
So for those folks who are listening online, you talked about the whole month of February would be opportunities for public input. So can you clarify a little bit what that will look like? What
Yes.
methodology, specific dates?
Yes, thank you. We currently have scheduled the regular board meetings for both the planning board, the steering committee, town council, of course. And what we haven't scheduled, but we're anticipating to be the first or second week of February is a public workshop that we will host, similar to what we did last fall for the comprehensive plan discussion, that will allow people to log in and hear updates about this plan specifically, but also the other changes that we've been talking about for a while with these 160D modifications and other planning work that's happening. We found out the week of Christmas, I think, that the town received the North Carolina Department of Transportation's bicycle and pedestrian planning grant. So we haven't received the contract work for that, paperwork yet for that, but we expect it soon, hopefully. So that's something that we're not going to be starting immediately, but something that the public should be aware of. And then the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, they'll have their own set of public input, but we'll brief the community on that as well. That's moving along very, very well. The Parks and Recreation Committee is meeting this Thursday evening to review that for a second round. They saw a draft of it in December. So more details yet on that to come, but it'll be early February when we have that. And then we'll open up the comment period essentially for the entire month of February. And we haven't quite figured out the mechanism for that, whether it's going to be an email or an online form, but we'll have it open for people to submit comment. And then after that, the month of March, Alan and I will put our heads together and try to incorporate everything that we've heard and everything that needs to be included, really polish the document, put the finishing touches on it to make it look like a final document as opposed to the draft form it's in now. And then it'll come back to you again in April for its formal adoption process, which starts with this board. And at that point, it's really at your pace. If you're happy with the plan on the first night, make a recommendation of approval. We can move on. If you have questions, we can come back to it at your next meeting until you're comfortable with it. And then once it's approved or recommended for approval by this board, it'll go up to town council for ultimate approval with them. We're hoping to have it wrapped up by the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. But of course, we understand the public review process is not always predictable. It may be delayed for one reason or another. There might be a really hot topic that comes up. We just don't know. So our goal is the end of the year, end of the fiscal year. But again, we'll strive to meet that as much as we can, considering the public comment and meeting schedules of the various boards.
Will those dates be advertised on the town website?
Absolutely.
Okay. Or will it be on the Making Mills River link or just on the website
We'll
general?
do both.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're listening, pay attention. Okay. Anything else for the comprehensive plan review? Okay. Well, let's move on then to the 160D review. Again, I'll let Daniel lead us through that.
Thank you. So this evening, we have a couple of things that we want to talk about. I'm just kind of jump ahead in the agenda a little bit and talk about erosion control and food trucks. We do not have text to give you. We've not prepared text to give you this evening. We were focusing on the noise ordinance and the other 160D changes. So what I'm going to focus on tonight is noise ordinance and then architectural standards. And so I will pass out, I believe I emailed everyone a digital copy of this, but I'll give you a paper copy so that you can have it in front of you as we speak. Give me just one moment. So before we jump into the text, I'm going to run through a quick presentation. It just kind of outlines the purpose and the intent of what we've put together. Give me 1 second to pull that up. Ryan, can you see that presentation?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to run through this quick outline and then we can dive into the text. So before we do anything with regards to the text in front of you, I want to make it abundantly clear that the nuisance ordinance, which is where this text is housed right now, exempts bona fide agricultural uses from any of the standards in the chapter. So whether it's noise, other nuisances like storage of materials or junk vehicles or what have you, they are specifically exempted. So those of you from an agricultural point of view looking at this, machinery, equipment, whatever you might have on in an agricultural setting on a bona fide farm is exempt. So keep that in mind as you read the text this evening, that it is in fact exempt. Anything else defined as agricultural in the town zoning ordinance. This section in front of you is from the nuisance section of the code, and under zoning, anything defined as agricultural, which are all of those uses and operations, are exempt from both the nuisance ordinance as well as the zoning chapter. So again, as we're reviewing this, please keep in mind that ag is exempt. So you don't need to worry about the sound of tractors or whatever the case may be. It is exempt. I want to make that abundantly clear. So the basics of the code that you have in front of you, it's with regards to enforcement, it would be up to a law enforcement officer or a town official to manage complaints and do investigations. It outlines a procedure for violations and the penalties associated with those. It sets quantifiable limits, so decibel readings as opposed to just what could be loosely considered disturbing noise. There are actual measurable decibel limits to that, along with time periods. So there are hours of the day that certain noise would be allowed or not. It lists specifically prohibited noise-making activities, and then allows for amplified sound with a permit. And then it also includes residential protections, which we'll get into more detail in just a moment. So prohibitions in general, things like car horns, loudspeakers, power equipment, explosives. There are exceptions to that for construction purposes, lawn maintenance, of course, and then anything that's noise that is allowed by permit. And motor vehicle operations, 75 decibels at a distance of 25 feet to the nearest lane. And that is spelled out in the ordinance in more detail than we have right here. But those are some of the general prohibitions in the code. Amplified sound is allowed with a permit. The general use prohibition is between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. the following day. You'll recall from our previous discussions that Henderson County, I believe it was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. We all thought that was a little bit too generous, and so the draft in front of you begins at 9 p.m. And then you can do live music without a permit, subject to those standards up there on the screen, 85 decibels Sunday through Thursday, between 8 and 9. And then those are different for different days of the week. That is There are some protections for residential areas, specifically limiting activities within 1,000 feet of a residential structure. And then emergency work and certain road work is excluded from prohibition. So, if there was I don't know, an ice storm or something, and there were chainsaws clearing the roads, those would be exempt from the standards. Going back to the procedure for enforcement, the sound will be measured by either law enforcement or town official, and it would be on the property who's creating the noise, and may be done in response to a complaint. That is, someone calls and says, my neighbor is playing loud music, whatever the case may be, or is simply a general compliance. So we mentioned earlier that we developed the permit standards for amplified sound. So there may be occasions where someone, just in the course of everyday compliance, is checking to make sure that folks are not exceeding those levels. With regards to noise permits and violations, typically what we had in mind for the noise permit was that it would be in conjunction with a temporary or a special use permit. In other words, the event would be of a temporary nature and not something that's happening all the time. And then they would be issued on a case-by-case basis with specific conditions set by staff for each individual case. In terms of the enforcement procedure, it's a little bit small on the screen, so I'll just read those out loud. For violations, the first violation is a warning or a notice of need of permit. So in other words, if someone's operating an outdoor venue and they didn't know they needed a permit, the first violation would be law enforcement or town officials saying, you've been warned that you need to get a notice, you need to get a permit. There'd be no financial penalty for that. It would just be, we have standards for the town hall and we'll take care of it. Second violation is not more than $500. And then the third violation is $500 and a 6-month revocation of permit if applicable. So if someone has secured a permit for 12 months to operate on so many Saturdays a year or whatever the case may be, the permit will be revoked for 6 months. And then the next one is violations that occur after a revocation and before renewal of a permit shall result in a fine not more than $1,000. And what this means is if you were permitted on January 1st for 12 months, but your permit is revoked on June 30th, if you get another violation between July 1st and December 31st, you will be subject to a $1,000 penalty. And then, in cases where a permit has been issued, fourth and subsequent violations that occur less than 1 year from the first violation shall result in a fine not more than $1,000. So if you're a repeat offender, essentially, you will be subject to a $1,000 penalty. And that's it for the overview. We have the full text in front of you. We don't need action on this tonight. I think it would be prudent for all of us to take a look at it together and then get questions and clarifications. I was not able to secure a Henderson County deputy to attend. That would be our next step, I think, is to have one of them come and just talk about how they manage it from their perspective. If we were to work with the county on enforcement, the town would need to set up an interlocal agreement between the town and the county, and we've not explored that in a formal sense yet. But that would be the next step as well, is getting some details on how that would actually occur. So that's all I have for an overview. Madam Chair, I don't know if you want to go through this line by line or open it up for general questions. I'll leave that for your direction.
Okay, well, I'll just start with some questions of my own. How about that?
That sounds great. If you give me
Maybe that will open the floor up for additional questions.
If you give me just one moment, I'm going to pull up the text so that people on Zoom can see it as well.
Okay.
Okay. And I have to be upfront with the board. Alan Steinbeck drafted most of this language and was not able to attend tonight, so I'm not going to be shy about saying I don't know, because he was responsible for the heavy lift on this, but I'm certainly happy to get answers if I don't know the question.
First of all, I do want to acknowledge the work that Alan put into that. Obviously, there's a lot been done in the 2 weeks since we last met, and I do appreciate all of that effort. The main focus of most of the questions that I have to do with using the decibel measurements and a decibel meter in order to define a violation.
Right.
First of all, obviously, if that's a route that we wanted to pursue, there would have to be purchasing of the equipment. I have absolutely no idea
Yeah.
how much a decibel meter would cost. I have no idea how much it would cost to calibrate it. There would have to be, I would hope, more than one person trained in the use of it. Otherwise, one person is going to be called upon an awful
Right.
lot. And then there's the availability of those personnel at often some of the more inconvenient times of the day to be able to use that. So can you answer that a little bit about
Yeah.
cost and what that might look like?
Yes, decibel meters range from $100 to over $1,000, depending upon the quality and the features that you want to secure with it. That would be basically a one-time cost. I don't know what it takes to calibrate a decibel meter. I don't know, Jim, if you happen to have any insight on that, given your profession.
I did just check around just to see what these things cost. And you're right. The ANSI meter anywhere from $100 up to $1,000. And if I remember right, in looking, there was also calibration meters that was very reasonable price also.
Right.
So I really don't think we need to, if we're going to do it, let's have some enforcement.
Right.
And we need the equipment, and of course that'd be up to council to appropriate that.
Yeah.
It's not that much money.
Yeah, I think the cost of entry, so to speak, with the equipment is manageable. The question comes down to enforcement, and I think our best bet, given what they do naturally, is to have law enforcement carry the bulk of this. And the way that we've drafted it is such that they wouldn't actually have to go out and write a citation, but if they get if someone calls and is complaining about sound, if they go out to the property and take a reading and then provide that information to the town could then pursue enforcement because we have evidence from a law enforcement officer that there in fact was a violation. So they wouldn't have to actually write a citation or be involved beyond that. But as far as personnel, that's the best option. We certainly don't have the capacity in-house right now to do it. We will be advertising for a code enforcement or zoning administrator position later this year, which will help. But again, that's one, maybe two people, depending upon how much I'm involved in that enforcement. I think our first bet would really be the sheriff's contract and sweeping out the contract in a local agreement that specifies what they would do and what their level of involvement would be. And then, of course, being trained on the decibel meter would be important.
And it does say in this that measurements would be done at the property line of the offending noise, if you will.
That's right.
Okay, so another of my concerns is, and it's one of the things that I think maybe Ms. Dorn mentioned, the way the topography is here in Mills River, a lot of times the rolling hills and things like that amplifies sounds differently as it travels away from a piece of property versus what it might be at a proper property line of an offender. So I'm not sure that doing these kinds of measurements would always measure it adequately for someone that's experiencing some sort of disturbance.
Do you know which section of the code you're referring to that references the measurement location? I know it's in here. I just don't know. Oh, there, okay. That's line 345.
It almost looks to me like at the same location could be determined as the location of the complaint. Is that, was that the sort of the intent of that language? Reading down, I'm sorry, I should have pointed that out, which the last part of the paragraph. The alleged violation noise level shall be determined at the same location or the edge of the property emanating the noise. So would that give the law enforcement officer the discretion to go to the location where the complaint is? Or does that make sense, Karen? Page 15. I apologize for speaking out of turn.
This
I don't know
one,
if you need to-
line 349
Okay.
is what is.
Oh, yeah, I could have read the
Specifically.
line.
So the way it's written, if it's practical to get to the property, I don't think that's written very clearly.
It's like Cheryl said, though, I realize the topographical around here can have, and anywhere, can have an effect. But I think it's up to the offender to adjust his sound accordingly. It's not an excuse because we're blasting and it's just traveling. It's kind of like in the radio frequency waves. The AM side follows the contour of the earth, where FM is line of sight.
Right.
And the FCC don't want to hear it. If you say, well, the wind was blowing that day and my signal carried. See how far that excuse will get you.
So I think we need to clarify that a little bit to say that if it can be measured at the location of the complaint, that's where it would be measured.
Also look on line 38. Maybe at the location where the complaint.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so that does clarify, because it states that ambient noise level is defined as readings no less than 10 minutes made at the location where a complainant claims to be disturbed. And then the noise level measurement is the ambient noise level shall be determined. And the ambient noise level being defined as it is by its own definition is at the location from which the complaint arises. So I still don't think it's written very clearly, but that's what it does, the way it's written. refer back to the definition. So the reading would be at the place of complaint if it's reasonably practical to do so. Does that answer your question?
Would it be inappropriate to ask and put on the spot a member of council who is here? A question.
You're the chair.
Going to put you on the hot spot, Mr. Austin. Okay. Okay. Fair enough.
I've got a couple of questions about this decibel reading if we're ready to move on to another question.
Sure.
This is way down in the weeds, but I'm imagining, so we have a little box that measures decibel levels. And the deputy is going to take that to the location. Does he or she have to come back here and get the box and go to that location? And, you can see a time lag where at the time of the complaint, it might have been at a certain level. By the time they get there, somebody's on to them, or it just has moved on to a different song or whatever it is. So how do we get the readings in a timely manner? So I don't know that we have an answer to that, but
And that's one of the reasons that I had requested that perhaps we have a Henderson County Sheriff's Deputy here to talk with us about their roles, because I would like some clarification on, are they required to be within town limits, a deputy 24/7, or is there a possibility that they could be elsewhere in the county, but simply have to take calls in Mills River should a call come through? And if that's the case, could they be in Bat Cave and be called to deal with a noise complaint? And by then that it may have dissipated. And I also, we're having a lot of conversation about decibels and the use of a decibel meter, but I don't want to spend so much time on that if that's not something that town council wants to pursue. And obviously we can't get an answer from them and we don't know what their preferences are. So, we can only do what we as a body of town planners feel would be in the best interest of the town. And so, it might get sent back to us, but just be aware of that.
and a second question I had, not being at all familiar with decibel levels, what does 75 decibels sound like? I mean,
We had a chart in previous information that was sent to us that showed what the level of a whisper was and what the level of ordinary conversation was. And it's in my bedroom at home. I didn't bring it back. I'm sorry. But there is a chart out there that shows those kinds of things.
okay, I probably have that chart on my computer somewhere, so I'll go back and look
You
at it.
probably do.
Okay, thank you.
So, at the risk of delay, I think it would be wise for us to table this until our next meeting to see if we can get a deputy here. And that will give us more opportunity at the staff level to get more of these details ironed out. Quite frankly, between the timing of last meeting and the holidays and tonight, we have the draft written, but we've not really tested it. So I think we need to do that before we spend too much time on that, if that's okay with the board.
Could we just, before we do that, if there were any really glaring things that someone wanted to be addressed before, so you could maybe be thinking about that before
Sure.
you brought it back? James, did you have something?
Your mic is.
How much will the permits be?
We haven't gotten to that level of detail yet.
Okay.
answer your question about decibels, normal is about 60 dB, a lawnmower is 90 dB, and a loud concert, rock concert is 120 dB.
And if I can chime in just a little bit also, my understanding of the decibel is 10 decibels louder is 100 times. Right, 10. It's a logarithmic scale. So a little bit is really a big, so okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I have another question on line 182. It says the use or firing of explosives, comma, firearms, comma, fireworks.
Mhm.
Are we trying to exclude somebody shooting their firearm in Mills River?
What was that line number, James?
182.
Yes, I caught that before the meeting tonight, and that comes from, we borrowed from several different ordinances. So I think we need to strike that because there are exemptions later on in the chapter that specifically
hunting.
allow for firearms.
Yeah, okay.
Right, I knew there was some other part that mentioned that it was,
Yeah, later it says that you
It
can
was-
do it
it was
to hunt, but I'm
excluded.
just,
right.
Yeah, for hunting or training.
And training.
Yeah.
And training could be defined as personal training versus having a group of people show up at your house to train.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, right. No, just strike the word firearms because we still, unless the board is okay with the firing of explosives, but the intention there is so it would read explosives, period, the use or firing of explosives, comma, fireworks, comma, or similar devices which create impulsive sound. So just striking the word firearms.
I did notice also on line 217, 218, it does talk about excessive noise on Sundays before noon, but it doesn't address if there were ever any Adventist churches who might be having services on Saturdays, how that might be addressed. And also I didn't notice, and I may have missed it. We had talked last meeting, we were talking about the permit process, that if somebody applied for a permit to exceed the recommendations, the possibility of including neighboring properties when the responsibility of notification to let people know. Is that in here? Did I miss it?
I don't think that it's in here, but we can make sure it's in there.
Mhm.
So if
Right.
you answer your for yourself, I'm sorry.
I guess what I'm saying is if they have a permit that they would, part of that permit would be their obligation to notify neighboring properties that they would be exceeding the limits, for different reasons, I know some of the complaints that have taken place, people have talked about, animals and their own personal, just to be expecting that.
It may be in here, but I would like to see something about a definition of temporary, because I think that would be really open to interpretation. I think of temporary as I'm throwing a party in my north pasture and, one day for a
Mhm.
wedding or something. But a minute ago, I think you mentioned an example and said a year.
All right.
So just so we all understand what temporary is, please.
Okay. That's a good point.
Okay, does anyone have any additional input before we table this for the next time?
On the exceptions, says sound from regularly scheduled outdoor athletic events on the campuses of local schools. And I didn't see anywhere in here that said an exception would be also the park. I think we need to make sure the parks. exempt.
Which line are you talking about, James?
It's also on 224. Just specifically says local schools. But
Mhm.
we have a baseball field. So.
Right. Okay.
Anything additional? Okay, thank you for your obvious scrutiny of this document. There was a lot to read and still a lot of work to be done. So I would say if you haven't had a chance to read through it, or if you had to do a rush job reading through it, go back, peruse it again. Daniel, anytime that you can send us changes that you've made ahead of time that we can look through before we come back to meet together, that would be very helpful, I think. Or if you guys are going through this and you think of something in the meantime, shoot Daniel an email and just let him know, this is something that I missed, something that occurred to me, because this, I think, will be a work in progress for a little bit of time. And, we're not going to get it all right. And, the old saying, you can't make everyone happy 100% of the time. But I think we are charged as representatives of our community to do the very best that we can for the most people that we can. Okay, so we will table the noise ordinance for additional work until our next meeting, and we'll move on to architectural standards.
Thank you. If you give me just one moment, I'll pull those up so we can look at those together as well.
Daniel, while you're doing that, if we could maybe take a quick 5-minute break.
Sure.
Will that work? And everybody can set up, stretch if you need to use the restroom, and those on documents ready for us to look at.
Yes, thank you. So last month, we looked at these and as part of the 160D changes. And the only, we haven't changed anything since then. The question that we have for you this evening specifically relates to the visibility of the facade. Currently, under the corridor overlay district, if the facade is visible from the right of way, is subject to the standards. That's a little bit of a challenging thing to administer. If you have a building that's visible, not visible because there are trees, and then those trees go away, all of a sudden it's visible. And so it's what we would like to do is get some direction from the board on whether it's visible from the right of way or if it's within a certain distance from the right of way. I recommend we go with the distance, if that's a flat, quantifiable, knowable standard that a designer can look at and look at a map and say my building is within X amount of feet, therefore my facades are subject to those standards, as opposed to if it can be seen from a right of way. That just is a very difficult thing to interpret and to administer. So that's the only change that we have. It's not in the text. We haven't changed the text since your last meeting, but that's the one thing we would like some direction on from the board.
Daniel, the first thing that pops into my mind is as soon as you put a quantifiable measurement on something, that someone who wants to avoid it is going to go
Right.
2 inches within that, so they're no longer accountable for having to fulfill those obligations.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely. And we thought about that when the corridor overlay district was created. I believe the standard before, I don't remember what the standard was before, but it was a measurement. If you were in so many feet, the entire property was subject to it. So I think we have to look at the corridor and look at what's visible from the road as you're driving down the road and use that as a standard. I know it's a little bit loose, but say within 500 feet of the subject roads, that covers a lot of ground. When you're looking at a straight line distance going up from the road. So we can, it might be helpful if we dug out the old maps from when we were looking at the corridor overlay district. I don't think that we gave those to you guys. I think you've looked at from a parcel point of view. So it might be helpful if we pulled those old maps out and gave them to you so that you can see what that actually looks like from those corridors. Which is a lot of land. There's a lot of overlap. But that's my recommendation, is to go with a straight line distance as opposed to visibility. Are there any questions about that? Does everyone understand what I'm talking about?
So you're talking about making it such a large measurement that it's pretty much possibly even going to encompass more than might actually even fall under the
It does that
visibility.
now. I mean, the way that it's written now, if it's visible from the public right of way, technically, if you build a commercial structure on top of Forge Mountain, it's subject to it because it's visible from the road. And what we're looking to do is really what it boils down to is the corridor. That's where these changes have the most impact, and that's what people see when they drive through town. And that was the intention of creating that district, was that is what you see when you're in Mills River, by and large, as you're passing through, because of the main corridors, there are only routes really to speak of. So I think it makes sense to limit it more so to just the corridor than everything that is visible from said corridor, because it's a lot of land.
Now, I think 500 feet is a very reasonable figure, because if anybody's driving down 280 and concentrating at 500 feet, that's dangerous. But we're still talking about the same roads that's listed.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
We're not going to take any of those off.
That's not our recommendation, but
Yeah,
this is up for.
I think that's reasonable myself.
Any questions for Daniel about that? I mean, any?
That's the full list right there. I can see all that now. There we go. Yes, they were added last spring. Mhm. And just a reminder to the board, the main reason we added this part of the discussion is because, first of all, when we adopted the corridor overlay district, accessory buildings were treated the same way as principal structures. And we thought that just wasn't reasonable, because a lot of times those structures are hidden behind the main building anyway. And you're just going to end up raising the cost of construction for anything that happens. But also because, having gone through this a couple times now with 3 or 4 different permits, the Hill Machinery example, I think, is a prime example where they took the straight math and put 40% of acceptable material, or 60% of acceptable, I think, 60-40. And then the other chunk of it was not those materials. So it's a really bad design. And our assumption is it's a cost-cutting measure that they did the absolute bare minimum. And it just doesn't, it's not a good way to administer the ordinance. So we want to make it simpler for everybody involved and more predictable for the designers.
So is there an action that we need to take on that? Of making a change of that nature, or is that something that you would like to write up more specifically and present to us, because we don't have that document except on the.
Yeah, I need some direction from the board. Do you want to maintain it as its visibility from the right of way, or do you want to come up with a linear distance from the right of way that buildings will be subject to? I don't need an exact measurement tonight, but if that's the approach, then we can work on some options for that. That's what we're looking for.
Any recommendations? Anyone would like to move on?
You want a recommendation tonight?
Yeah, well, we don't need a formal motion to accept or not.
My
accept.
recommendation is the 500 feet.
Okay.
Okay. And like you said, we don't even need to give a specific distance, just a recommendation that we move away from the terminology being visible from those specified lanes of travel to simply being a certain distance from them.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anyone who would disagree that we make that change?
You turn on your microphone, please. So for the folks listening, the question was how we arrived at 500 feet. When we were developing the corridor district, we actually took some straight line measurements from the roads and went up. This was mainly south of town on 280, went up the hillside to 500 feet and to 1,000 feet. And that's where we came up with 1,000 feet. 1,000 feet as a crow flies is a pretty long way when you're looking at human scale and looking from the road. And it just included way too much land that we thought that was zoned residentially, was already single family housing, and unnecessarily complicated the permitting process. So we cut it back to 500 feet, but then we just went with properties, the entire property, not the building itself. So I think it's more reasonable, I think, to go with the structure than the property. Because like someone mentioned, you can, with a deep enough property, the building might not even be visible from the road, and that's fine. As long as it's past that dimension, you don't have to comply with the standards. But if any part of the building is within that 500 feet, for example, it could be 750 or whatever, then the building would have to comply with the standards as they're written right now. But I think with the consensus of using straight line distance, we can come back to you with some maps at your next meeting. So you can actually see what that would look like, what that would capture would be the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, you were reading my mind. I was going to ask you to bring that back and show us just kind of an overlay of what that would encompass if we, with that particular measurement, since that seems to be the one that's popping up the most.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like the consensus would be to move ahead with making that terminology change and then bring that back to us and let us look at the impact that would have, and we can then move forward from there.
Yep, that'll work. We'll have that for you at your next meeting.
Okay, so are we going to also table erosion control and food trucks for tonight since there's no text available? Or are there things you would like to mention regarding that?
I don't have anything additional to add. I think we got the direction we needed from your meeting in December. Alan is actively working on the the erosion control measures with some folks on his team. We don't have complete language drafted yet, but that work has begun. The food truck information has not been the highest priority for us. We were really focusing on the noise, architectural standards, and erosion control. But we do have some folks in town who are very interested, as they spoke last month, in pursuing that. So we are keeping that on the radar, but our focus has been on the 160D, the noise ordinance, and the architectural standards. So we do not have text to you for review yet. We've not drafted anything. We'll get that done as soon as we can.
Okay, and again, I would just ask each of you, as you think of things, we had a conversation 2 weeks ago regarding both of those topics. If you think of things that you want to be sure that are included or you have questions about, please don't hesitate to reach out to Daniel or even, each of us, just if you need clarification or whatever, so that when that document is ready to come before us, we've tried to address things beforehand rather than at that moment. Okay, so it appears that is going to be all for old business tonight. We have no new business on the agenda for tonight either. Are there any additional items, any updates that we need from council or anything that we need to be aware of?
Taxes were due today. So if you haven't paid those, make sure you come in tomorrow. You'll have to pay a penalty, but we won't tell anybody. The Parks and Recreation Plan is in the throes right now of really being written. We got some draft recommendations last month. So Nicole is working with the Parks Advisory Committee to get that put together. I mentioned the bike and pedestrian planning grant that the town received. The town's match on that is $5,000. The total estimated cost is about $120,000. DOT pays for a big chunk the federal government pays for a big chunk of that through DOT. So that's exciting. We were awarded a grant last summer, I want to say, for the Stream Bank Restoration Project down on the river. But the state has yet to provide us the contract documents to get moving on that. So we're just kind of sitting and waiting for them to do that. We are getting into the budgeting season now. We'll have the visioning session at the end of the month with town council, the 28th and the 29th. We will spend a good part of that time talking about planning, both for the comprehensive plan and for the recreation master plan. So that's exciting. And then we will start working on the budgeting for next year, and all that comes with that. So exciting times. I'm glad you were all able to make it tonight, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful 2021.
Any word on when O'Reilly Auto Parts is going to open?
They are working on their what's it called, watershed permit compliance. That they need to get that all wrapped up with the county, and I think that's the last step that they have. We issued the CO back in November. They're just working through that final phase, and that's a good point to mention. As far as development, we've permitted the Circle K. As you recall, that came early in December. I don't have a timeline for their construction, but that's been approved. We have issued approval for a new storage facility off of 191 North. I mentioned the Hills Machinery. They have equipment on site, but I don't think they've started much of anything at this point. Mills River Crossing phases 3 and 4 on the other side of the highway. They're moving dirt over there now, getting ready to put the roads in. And we exceeded our permit numbers compared to last year. In 2018, I think the town issued 124 permits. 2019 was about 150. And last December 31st of 2020, it was 203 permits. So it's been a steady climb, and in that, not unexpected. And sales tax numbers are looking good, so things are looking good for the town.
Daniel, I know you've got a lot on your plate, but if you can find time to contact DOT,
Mm-hmm.
there is excessive trash along 280
Okay.
that needs to be picked up in several locations.
Okay, again, I thank you guys for your commitment and your time this evening. Our next meeting is scheduled for January the 19th at 6:30 p.m. It's there at the bottom of your sheet. So with that being said, I will await a motion. A second? All right, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This meeting is adjourned.